Okay, we'll get started. So good morning, everyone. I'm Ramiro Salazar. I'm from the city of San Antonio. I'm the director of the San Antonio Public Library System. Thank you all for being here. We have a wonderful panel this morning. We'll be talking about how, in particular, libraries have responded to the pandemic. I know that we all know how, what kind of impact the pandemic has had on organizations, large organizations, cities, as well as departments making up the organization. So we're going to have a conversation about that. We're glad to have some members of the panel here who I will introduce at this time. Just want to make sure, looking at my notes, I introduce myself as moderator. I'm the moderator this morning, and I'm glad to be here in Aurora, Colorado, to participate in the Local Government Hispanic Network Conference. So I'll start with Whitney Oakley. Whitney was born and raised in Colorado, USA. She has a BS in Human Services and currently works as the branch manager of the Anything Bennett Library. Whitney is passionate about community and national service and sits on the Town of Bennett Board of Trustees as a trustee member. She currently lives in Bennett, Colorado with her husband, daughter, and their many animals. Welcome, Whitney. Thank you for being part of this panel.
Thank you.
Next panelist is Ricardo Cardenas. Ricardo was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. He received his bachelor's degree from North Central University in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 2013, and his Master of Divinity from Denver Seminary 2016. Ricardo loves serving his community through his work at the library, as well as his role as pastor of the local church. Outside of work, he enjoys baseball, gardening, reading. He lives in South Commerce City with his wife and 3 children. So welcome, Ricardo. Thank you for being part of this panel discussion. Again, to reiterate, we're going to talk about how governments, and in this case, library organization, has responded to the pandemic, how all of us have pivoted. And here we have a primary role model that will be sharing with us how they did that. But before we do that, I would like to ask one of the panelists to respond. Anything Libraries is known as a very innovative library. In fact, libraries really not attached to their name. So I think the audience would be interested to know how the name came about and how they may be a little different from other libraries before we start talking about the pandemic and how this organization responded to the pandemic. So who would like to address that?
I'd be happy to. Yeah. So Anything Libraries is the library district for Adams County, Colorado. And I always like to frame who we are as a little bit of our story. We often tell a story that back, 10, 15 years ago, we're the lowest funded library district in the state of Colorado. And through a series of different things that happened, we had some new leadership, also had some new funding that came through, and took that as an opportunity for our library district to kind of rebrand who we are and also reimagine what a library district is and how a library can serve a local community. And so it was during that time that we came up with the name Anything, which is not a real word, it's a made-up word. But it kind of plays on that idea of at Anything you can explore, learn, grow in anything. And so we are innovative. We try to be innovative. We try to be a local gathering space for our community. We try to be a space that is not just known for how many books we circulate or how many story times we do, but how we can help people foster creativity, curiosity, and learning and growing and pursuing becoming their best self through the local library. And so that's a little bit of what I would say about us. We do a lot of things very non-traditionally for a local library, but we've found that our community really has come to appreciate us and the role that we play. Would you add anything to that, Whitney?
I would just say some of the changes and differences that were made, and you'll see this changing and happening in the library world in general, is one of the very first things we did was get rid of overdue fines. We changed over to WordThink instead of Dewey Decimal to make the collection more accessible to customers that enter into the building. And then we focused a lot on experiential and formal learning. So a lot of what we do is to provide experiences and informal learning opportunities for all ages so that they can take those skills and knowledge with them out into the world to better their quality of life. So, but I think Ricardo hit the nail on the head, and those are just some of the practical ways that we shifted and changed to make the library more innovative and more accessible to the community.
Well, thank you. So that will inform the next question. And by the way, I served as president of the Public Library Association during the pandemic, and as the representative for the Public Library Association, I had to respond to many media requests regarding how libraries were managing during the pandemic. As you know, March 2020, practically every public library had to close their doors when the pandemic hit us, with the exception of very small rural libraries. So many libraries responded in different ways. How did your organization responded to the pandemic when it first forced us to close our doors? And so I'll let you elaborate on that. How did you respond to continue to serve the communities?
Yeah. So I think as with everybody during the pandemic, there was this season where we were very disoriented, trying to find it out which way is up, which way is down, what are we even doing, and how can we do it? I think the biggest way we responded was first by thinking, how can we serve our communities during this time, kind of with the same framework that we always do. So anything, we're really focused on things like hospitality, inspiring curiosity. And so the first thing that happened was, just like everyone during a pandemic, is we thought, man, how can we meet the practical needs that our community is experiencing right here and right now? And so for some of us, that meant we put together masks, because masks were a shortage at the beginning of all this. I know that feels like a long time ago when that was happening, but we had a team who sewed masks and we distributed them in the community. And so some of them were very practical as we kind of found our grounding. And then we started looking more specifically at how can we meet our mission as an organization, which is to inspire curiosity and be hospitable to our community? How can we meet that even with the constraints that COVID has put around us? And so it was almost really fun to see our organization adapt in that way, because it allowed us to, it was almost like a new challenge for us to say, hey, this is our mission and vision as an organization. How do we do that with all of these new unique challenges? And so that was kind of the primary question that we asked. And then we started saying, okay, well, what can we do? We started doing things like curbside services. We did print and mail services. So a lot of people who come to the community or come to the library really need just some really practical things like access to technology or printing and copying and things like that. And when you can't do that in person, we try to find ways to work around so that maybe they could send that information to us virtually, and then we could print and mail it to them instead of them having to come in and do it in person. So that was a little bit of how we responded. Whitney, how would you add?
One of the things that I was really, really proud of our organization was how they were so determined to continue to serve our communities in the best way possible. And we went from having 7 physical library locations to being one virtual team that we split up into many smaller groups. So even though I manage the Bennett Library, I would have staff from Ricardo's branch or a different branch working on separate individual projects to service our community. So one of the projects I led, for instance, was in collaboration with Adams County. We called every active cardholder over the age of 65 that had used our libraries in the last 3 years to see what they needed. What did they have access to the resources they needed, to technology they needed to be able to Zoom call with their families, to do check-in with them. And we had a few that even asked, will you call us every 2 weeks? And we were able to do that. And so I think we made, thousands, I think it was 8,000 phone calls in the first few weeks of the pandemic to make sure that we could provide the community with access to the information, technology, and resources that they needed. And just to see how those small teams came together, we kind of started acting as one larger library to make sure that the people in our community, which happened to be Adams County, had the resources they needed to get through the pandemic.
Thank you. So I learned again as president of the Public Library Association that some libraries pivoted to supporting the community, serving as distribution centers for food and so on. And you mentioned masks, that the purchasing masks and making those available. Did you provide any of those kind of not directly related to library services? And can you elaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. Man, it's amazing how long the pandemic has been, because it's kind of been iterations of service. Right at the very beginning, yes, there was a lot of those practical, there were masks, there were things like that. There were other things that we did, which were kind of like one thing that Anythink has been doing in the past several years is local farmers markets with vouchers for folks who qualify for things like food stamps or things of that nature. And so we took that and we did that at some of our locations as well by doing basically produce box distributions or food distribution. So people could come through, and this actually didn't need to qualify for or anything like that. But at several of our branches, we were able to schedule these maybe once a month. Like at Commerce City, we applied for a local grant for meeting. It was basically COVID response funds for nonprofit organizations. And so we applied for a local grant, and then we were able to, with that money, schedule several of these food box distributions. And so that was another thing where, in the process of figuring out what are we doing in the midst of this, taking the things that we may not traditionally even do as a library and say, how can we still help meet certain needs? And that was just kind of one example that I can think of.
One of the other things that we did when the schools first closed down, they were still providing the drive-by lunch services, and the library provided school supply activity packets for kids that were suddenly going to be doing school at home. And we would have staff members attend the drive-by school lunch pickups and give them a bag of school supplies to take home to be able to continue their education at home in a successful manner. And then we also were able to donate quite a few of those to the smaller school districts. So I know out in Bennett and Strasburg, we were able to take almost a whole pallet of school supplies for them to continue to distribute to their families as they needed stuff at home to continue their education.
During this period, as you were responding to the pandemic and figuring out creative and innovative ways to respond to the community, is there any one or more community need that kind of surfaced and percolated up that really indicated to you that you needed to do something to respond to that need?
So for me, what really came to light was we talk about the digital divide quite a bit in libraries, but to see the amount of individuals who did not have access to technology or reliable internet pre-pandemic, it really brought that to the forefront. Even though we knew it existed, now we were dealing with it in real time. And a story that I think about from our work that we did in 2020, during the senior calls, we had a woman who was living at an assisted living facility who had been working on a higher education degree and said, I'm not going to be able to finish it. I don't have a laptop. We don't have good internet. And we were able to safely, in a COVID-friendly way, get her a laptop and a hotspot. And then she, in a future call, had said I was able to finish my degree, and I couldn't have done it if somebody hadn't asked me, do I need anything? And so to see that we were able to help somebody succeed in finishing something they had been working on for years and years and years, it was really eye-opening to, there are certain segments of our population that still do not have access to the things that they would need to do that if all of these things were to shut down. And so that was a big one for me. And we have since ramped up our access to hotspots. We had them pre-COVID, but now we have even more, getting them out there in the community. We have kids that are still doing hybrid learning from home that use our hotspots on a regular basis for internet in their homes, especially out where I live in a more rural community. And we've really ramped up the amount of technology that you can take home outside of the library to help and service that digital divide.
Yeah, I think the technology is the biggest one. Like we could talk about any number of things that the library has had to provide, but technology is just one of those things that some people have access to it, and we take it for granted that we have access to it. And then there's other people who really depend upon library services to do very basic things like apply for jobs or access their email or access the internet. And if they don't have the library, then they don't have access to any of that. And so when we were shut down, we were doing curbside services for a time, but even with curbside services, people still were not able to come into the building. And so we had to think, man, how can we provide some of that access to technology or technological needs, which Whitney spoke about a little bit with Wi-Fi hotspots and upping some of those technology things that we could check out to people. But then there were other things that we did that were like just, so in the past, for example, pre-COVID, we would turn off our Wi-Fi in our buildings whenever we were open or closed. And so if we were open, our Wi-Fi was on, but if we were closed, our Wi-Fi would turn off. That we changed because we knew that even if we were open or even if we were closed or if we were only open for limited hours, that there were a lot of people who would come and sit in our parking lot or sit out front on a picnic bench or something. And they just needed access to Wi-Fi to do some of those basic things. And so that was just one thing. We extended how far our Wi-Fi reaches on our property so that people could come in, and if they needed to sit outside during COVID, when we were still social distancing or when we didn't have access to have people in the building, they could still sit outside and do that basic technological work that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So those were some other practical things that we did that were I think just really fun. And a lot of that was our IT team and others kind of thinking outside the box of, man, how can we get technology into people's hands even when our hands are tied to some extent?
Well, I want to applaud you for that, because public libraries played a very important role in responding to the challenges and restrictions of the pandemic, and trying to bridge the digital divide was a key response from libraries, and you demonstrated how you did that. Because households and kids were, as you indicated, doing distant learning. Many of those households, especially in vulnerable communities, do not have access to high-speed internet, and how you responded is commendable. So I wanted to applaud you for those efforts. Now, you indicated that as part of your response, you introduced curbside service, you pivoted to virtual programming. Do you see any of those models continuing now that we're kind of getting past the pandemic? We're still in it. Do you see any of those innovative responses and services that you developed to serve the community? Do you see them continuing into the future?
Yeah, one of the services that kind of came up towards more of the end of the pandemic was that we realized there are populations within our communities that may not have as ready access to getting to the library or somebody to bring them to the library, particularly school-age children who could have fallen behind in reading and literacy during the pandemic. And earlier this year, we started what's called the Anythink box. It's kind of like a subscription box, but it goes to families with school-aged, we prefer elementary aged, but I think what we kind of do 5 to 12-ish for the age range. And they get 6 books delivered to their home monthly to help support the kids in their house that might not have ready access to be able to get to the library to support their education at home. And that's something that our foundation is working to support to keep the longevity of this, but it has been so well received and successful, and something that I definitely see being carried on through hopefully the long-term future to provide a bigger reach and access to our customers. I think we realized through the pandemic just might not have even the ability to get to a branch. So how do we bring our services to them? And I think that's one of the things that will stick with us, is how do we get our services out into the community that may not live within a couple blocks of the library. And so that's one of the big things I know what we'll take with us.
Yeah, I think you could probably talk to almost anybody in any industry, and they could tell you some weird blessings that have almost come out from having to innovate and change in the midst of the pandemic. And I think things like the Anything Box is one of them. I also think certain aspects of virtual programming, for example, when we had to move to virtual programming, it created a situation where, again, we were no longer individual branches throughout Adams County. We were one big library district. And so people would suddenly hop in on virtual programs that Commerce City was offering, even though they prior to that would have been, somebody who attended Bennett's programs or Wright Farms programs or things of that nature. And so that was one cool thing, is that it brought us together in that way that we could serve our community in a different, more holistic way. But along with that came the opportunity to do things like, with virtual programming, we were no longer limited by geography. And so we did some children's programs or some other types of programs where we didn't have to host a local expert who could come in and talk about things, but they were people from all over the country or people from all over the world who could log on and do a virtual children's program or story time or performance of some sort. Even though it's virtual, it still provided access to resources and knowledge and people who, because they were far away from us, they could provide insight that we never even thought of before. And so that was another cool thing that I could see us continuing to do from time to time in the future. So yeah.
Great. So let's talk about organizational challenges. We talked about previously about challenges for your organization to serve the community. So internally, reflecting inward, what kind of organizational challenges did you encounter and how did you respond? For example, from my experience, we had employees that had to continue to work on site. They could not remote work. And so they were concerned about safety. And there was also some issues about some employees being able to work remotely and some others could not. So that created some challenges. I'm wondering if you encountered those kind of challenges and how did you respond to those organizational challenges and concerns?
Yes, definitely. And I think that goes back to a little bit of the way that we had to adapt was to people no longer were able to work in some of the roles that they could when the library is open. For instance, when you work in a public library, there are people that are hired just to handle materials and to shelve books. And if you're not open or you don't have staff in the building, they had to change and adapt. We also have cafe staff at one of our locations. There's a cafe in the library that had to completely adapt and change to what their role would look like. And so when the buildings were entirely not open, everybody was on a team of some sort, whether it was printing and mailing, sewing masks, calling senior citizens, manning the Anything Connect line, which was incoming calls that people could connect with a librarian whenever they needed to. There was some data cleanup that we were able to do during that time remotely, different cataloging work that we were able to do remotely, and every single person was on a team. I think branch managers had an interesting, difficult time just to make sure that all of our staff were working and prioritizing and meeting hours, even though some of their jobs had never required some of these things they were doing, but we were able to adapt and do it well. And then as we returned to our buildings, we did return in smaller teams on a rotating schedule to kind of ensure that our exposure to a certain number of staff was limited. So, we would have people come back in teams of 2 or 3. And those first couple weeks were just checking in book drops and shelving books. Even if I was a branch manager, I was shelving books when I was in the branch. So to really work to get the libraries back to being open. And even then when we were open to the public again in late 2020, we were working in smaller teams, which was a challenge in its own way to service the community with less people in the building. But we were able to do it. And I'm so proud of the way Anything was able to adapt and innovate and keep everybody working through the pandemic, so that our staff could stay on staff and feel like they were a bigger part of impacting people's lives during the pandemic instead of having to be concerned about losing their jobs. I was very proud to work for the organization I worked for that provided those kinds of services to the community by being innovative and having people adapt their jobs a little bit to get through. And to come out the other side with people back in their same roles they're in now has also been a different challenge, because they were going from working on big picture projects to shelving books again. But they're doing it wonderfully, and with very optimistic attitudes and that anything spirit that we love. But yes, there was definitely challenges, and I think that we adapted the best way that we could.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for me personally was just the aspect I thrive on working with people like in the flesh. I think that's one of the big blessings of being in public libraries is just working with people face to face. And when you don't have that opportunity anymore and your job becomes more purely logistical, that was a challenge for me personally, but it also created an opportunity for us to shore up some things that needed shoring up that I think I think COVID pushed the pause button on almost everybody's life for a period of time, some of us for longer, but it created an opportunity for us to kind of reflect and say, okay, what are some projects that we can work on right now? And how can we, like Whitney said, adapt some of our roles for the time being? It's not forever, but for now, so that we can do things that everybody kind of all hands on deck, like catalog cleanup or basic things like shelving books. So it took some reimagining and some adaptation. But I think I was really, really proud of how a lot of our team responded to that challenge and said, okay, it's not ideal. It's not what my normal job description is, but we're going to do what we need to get through this season.
If I may, I'd like to add to what you both reported on how anything responded to the organizational challenges. In our library, it's a large library system with 30 locations. So one of the concerns, as you indicated, you said people like to connect and so on, and we weren't meeting face to face. So there was a big concern from my perspective about the emotional health of our employees.
Yeah.
And how do we stay connected? So what I instituted was a weekly video, and that helped a lot. The feedback I received from the employees was tremendous, was very positive. Because again, we were dealing with isolation. Our employees were isolated with their families, and there wasn't that physical connection. So I just wanted to add that strategy for the benefit of those of the audience. So looking to the future, we talked about some of the services, virtual programming, for example, that you anticipate will continue. In terms of skill sets for employees, we learned during the pandemic that we meaning the organizational, we had to develop new skill sets from Zoom meetings, how to present ourselves, how to communicate, how to make sure the noises were minimized and we didn't have the phone on, and because you're having a professional meeting, and also programming. And so what kind of skill sets or competencies are you envisioning to continue for the future as part of your recruitment, your retention, and your development of your staffing complements? What do you all envision?
I think one of the most important things that COVID highlighted, and this is something that our organization's always kind of focused on, like when we hire folks, we really seek to hire people based off of not just the skill sets they have on paper, but also some of those soft skills, some of those aspects of who you are as a person. And one of those things is just that general adaptability. Like, are you an adaptable person when things pop up and things change? Or optimism, like one of our core values at Anythink is we are optimistic people. And so obviously a worldwide pandemic is going to test your optimism and your ability to look on the bright side all the time. But I think when we hit a really tough season worldwide, it created an opportunity for some of those things to really pop up and come to the surface in a way that they don't when you're just dealing with, a tough customer or a tough day at the library or something like that. And so I think continuing to find those people who are optimistic, who are adaptable, and that doesn't mean you can't have a bad day or anything like that, but it means that in order to be successful in a world that's constantly changing and in a pandemic that's still going on a year and a half later, there just has to be a general ability to be flexible, to be adaptable, to focus on the good that's happening, even in the midst of all of the tough things that are happening. So, yeah.
Yes, to echo what Ricardo was saying is we do values-based hiring, which is one of the things that I love about Anythink, is we do believe skills can be taught, but you either contain our values or you don't. And so we do values-based hiring, and one of our values is compassion for each other and our customers. And I would say we don't fully know yet 100% all of the things we're going to have to look for as we're hiring, because we are still coming out of the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic. And there have been things that have changed working in a public library that I was not even fully aware of. I think parents are tired. I think kids are tired. I think our communities are tired. And interacting with our customers have been different than they were pre-pandemic. And needing the patience and the compassion in a helping profession is very difficult sometimes when you yourself are going through a pandemic. And so having to coach staff through, yes, today was crazy. The kids were crazy. The moms are tired. The dads are tired. The caregivers are tired. For these kids, it is tiring for us. And so I would say we're still learning what exactly we're going to need to look for in staffing moving forward, because our communities are coming back different. This was a hard thing that our communities went through, and they're coming back different. Their needs are going to be different. So our staffing needs are going to be different, but we can always fall back on that. We are going to hire based on our values, and hopefully that will continue to work for us as things change.
Well, that's a very insightful approach, and I like that value-based hiring. I support that notion, and I get a sense that you have an organizational culture. It's clear to me the mindset is innovation, adaptability, and to me it appears the ultimate goal is serving the public and creating a wonderful experience for them. So I'm glad you're sharing that with us and with the rest of the audience, because as you were talking, and I was thinking that's a wonderful idea, and that's something that I would like personally to pursue with our organization. And then I start to think, oh, we have to deal with HR, but those are challenges that that we embrace, and that we'll work with HR and figure out a way how to get to that goal, because I believe this notion of focusing on the personality, the mindset of the individual, skill sets, experience, that's very important, absolutely. But having that appropriate mindset to take on that kind of job of dealing with the public, and I'm speaking for all public-facing departments, not only libraries, but human services and housing and so on. So thank you for sharing that with us and giving me an opportunity to make a plug for other organizations to be thinking of value-based hiring, because I think that's what, from my perspective, will make an organization thrive. If you focus on mindsets and personalities and attitudes, yes, skill sets and experiences are very important, but if you get that other piece to it, I mean, you can create wonderful teams as you have.
Yeah. If I could just add to that as well, I think one way that looks very practically in our organization that I think could maybe be adaptable to other types of services and organizations is the level of, so for example, I do not have formal librarian education. That's not what I went to school for. I went to school to be a pastor. I went to Denver Seminary. And so but the fact that I could come to Anythink libraries and thrive in this place because I'm a certain type of person, and the same with Whitney. Whitney's formal background is not in, and so we do have many people who are formally trained in public libraries or have gotten MLIS degrees and things of that nature. But somebody like Whitney or myself would not be even high candidates at some library districts because they have on paper, you need to check this box before you could work here, and that's fine. I think every organization works different, but I would also add that if there are ways that you can look at, this is just an aspect of values-based hiring where yes, we do have some professional requirements. We do have some professional needs that we can't compromise, but what can we shift or be adaptable or kind of change our expectations for so that we know that we are drawing people who are going to be successful and make us more successful, make us a better organization, rather than keeping that one thing just to check the box, and then we're limiting who we can have be a part of our organization. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Of course, I would echo Ricardo because I don't have an MLS. No, my background is in human services and specifically nonprofit management, which I think translates very well to libraries. Because I wanted to work in a field where I was serving the community and underserved populations, and I get to do that every day. And I grew up in libraries, and I have a love for libraries. And so I want to echo what Ricardo was saying. I think there is a value to education. Libraries do value education. Clearly, we are an institute that wants to promote education. But I think you can have a balance in your organization. I have 2 people that work on me in my staff that have MLIS degrees and support the backbone of my branch with library science, but being able to be flexible to saying, this person brings the values, the culture, and the attitude I want on my team. If they don't have that formalized education, it might not be the end of the world.
Thank you. And for the record, I'm one of those library leaders that are aligned with that belief that in my team, some members of our team probably watching, this is not news to them. I don't really believe that the Masters of Library Science should be the only credential in a library organization, especially for leadership positions. I like the idea of this value-based hiring. And as president of the Public Library Association, that wasn't that popular when I would bring up this idea of we need to rethink the credentials for library organizations because professions can be threatened by it. Okay, wait a minute, you don't value? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that shouldn't be the only credential. Certainly someone with a master's in library science can compete for a job, but it shouldn't be the only credential. And in San Antonio, we're going through a process right now, the strategic plan that speaks to not only credentials, but new service models for the future. And we learn a lot from the pandemic, and you covered a lot of it as part of our conversation. So I'll get off my soapbox and get on to the next question. And so, as dealing with the pandemic, we had to transform, convert our spaces, add protective elements, plastic shields, and so on, as we started allowing people to come into our buildings. How does that inform the future spaces of libraries and other public-facing services?
So I'm excited that you asked this question because I think this was something that Anythink was set up really well to do already, and something that I think kind of was a measure of success, if you would, of how our libraries are set up. So Anythink focuses on very airy, spacious buildings. We don't have as many books, I would say, as a traditional library has, even though we have access to them, they're not sitting in the physical library in the same quantities. And we've created large spaces for gathering because we want to be a community gathering place where people can come for civic engagement. They can come for meetings to have conversation. And so really when we first reopened, most of all Anythink had to do, of course, we had the signage, we had all of the please stand 6 feet apart. But all we really had to do beyond that was we upped the filters in the HVAC system. We opened up the windows and we spaced out the chairs 6 feet apart. And it was able to be a safe, healthy environment. Even to this day, when you enter Anythink library, you will be able to comfortably sit, do your work, read a book, whatever it might be, 6 feet away from another person in a nice, high ceilinged, open space environment. And we didn't have any issues with outbreaks of COVID. And it's something that I was really proud of the organization. We were able to say, wow, this model really worked. And of course, as we look to build new libraries, maybe hopefully sometime in the future, they will have that same open, arid, spacious feel that we have now found is very safe. In addition to that, we have lovely outdoor spaces at each of our locations. that we ramped up the furniture in. We kind of spruced a lot of them up. A lot of them got added gardens that didn't have them. I know Ricardo's location already did, but my location did not. So we ramped up and spent time in making the outdoor spaces very accommodating. They have access to the Wi-Fi. There's shaded areas, umbrellas. And as we look at new libraries in our system, we're really, really focusing on those outdoor spaces so that they start off really strong to provide the open air indoor to outdoor feel that keeps it very natural, that we know now is safer for all of us as we move forward.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that other than I just love being outdoors. Like if there's anything that you can do to have your organization help people experience, like, man, getting out of the building from time to time and sitting outside. I think COVID did that for a lot of us. It forced us to take Zoom calls outside, you know, or do things that we would normally do indoors outside. I think that was just a huge takeaway for me personally of, oh, I thrive in a different way than I do when I'm just sitting at my desk in my kind of dark office all day. It helps for me to get out into a place where I can take my laptop and go sit in our beautiful outdoor space or think. So I think that was one of the big things, was providing our customers with the ability to, yeah, we've always had these outdoor spaces, but we kind of prioritize them in a new way of saying, we can do programming outdoors. Like just because we have a programming space indoors, yeah, we want to use that. And when it's summer, why not just go outside and do most of our stuff outdoors if the weather permits? It helps you to be a happier human, I think. So, yeah.
If I was to summarize what both of you stated, is future spaces should be flexible, ability to adapt and move, maybe more open spaces to take programming and services outside. Yeah, I concur with that. So we're running out of time. I would like to have allow a little time for Q&A, but the last question, I expect we have city managers, deputy city managers, county supervisors in the audience, either here or listening. What messages would you, or message points would you like for them to take away from this session, from your experience? They're decision makers. So what would you tell them, if anything?
Well, one of the wonderful things that I experienced personally as a branch manager of a library was renewed, strengthened partnerships with both the county and the town that I work in, because we were able to work together to accomplish some really big, lofty goals the past 2 years. And I think this allowed an opportunity for different kinds of organizations and departments to work together in a new way that maybe we were very siloed before, but it doesn't have to be that way, to come together to figure out what each organization or department brings to the table to make something really amazing happen. And so I will forever take that with me. And I do think that our partnerships leaving the pandemic, or as we attempt to leave the pandemic, will remain strengthened and renewed through this, because we had to rely on one another. And that's a big thing that sticks out for me, in addition to all the things that we talked about as far as being flexible and adapting, and hiring, and all of those things, is also just, we don't have to stay so much in our box. And I think we really learned the great things that come from being able to step outside of that.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is thank you for serving your communities in
Yeah.
the way that you did during the pandemic, because it's tough being in a position of leadership, and especially government leadership in the midst of a pandemic is not for the faint of heart. So thank you for serving your communities the way that you do. The second thing I would say is yeah, I think one of the things I've always known, but I learned in a new way during the pandemic, was just the fact that there are so many local community organizations that each play a different part in the community. I think in weird ways, sometimes we feel like we have to be competitive, like, oh, we have to do it all at the library. And I think COVID really helped me throw that out the window and say, man, there are other organizations who are going to meet different needs in our community far better than we can. And so why don't we partner with them instead of thinking that we have to do it better than them, you know? And I'm not saying that was organizational. I'm just saying that in my own leadership, sometimes you think, man, oh, we could do that better. And it's like, no, actually, they could do that way better than us. And so let's focus on what we can do really well, and let's connect others to them to help them do their job really well. And so I would say lean into other networks and lean in. I mean, I think that's such a huge part of government leadership as it is, but lean into those other resources in your community, including your public libraries, wherever you're going back home to, because I think we're a great place to support community members.
I agree. I'm biased, but all right. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hello. It was really great to hear how you called your customers that were like 65 and up. I thought that outreach was really amazing. So I'm just curious, did you pivot any other ways to do outreach to let folks know of the programs that you had virtually? And I know like typically you put stuff online, hand out flyers, but I'm just curious, was there anything different you felt you did for outreach because of the pandemic to let folks know of the new programming that you offered?
I don't know if there was anything specifically marketing or outreach related. What I will say is a lot of our larger initiatives, we added some live streaming components to, and a lot of folks that didn't know or I would say didn't know really about the amount of services that we offer even virtually, would just happen to see the live stream and then get connected. And a lot of them were like, I'm homebound and I've never been able to participate in a program through you guys. And it was amazing to see that not only you live stream, but then you have a YouTube channel where we were doing pre-recorded story times and programs. And we had some like literacy, informal education tips for littles that we would pre-record so that at home parents could continue their preschoolers education. And so I think that was a big help. And also having the connections that we made with the local schools that was strengthened and the county that was strengthened. And then personally, in Bennett, we were part of the Arts Council. They were able to help us and we were able to help them speak about the services each other were providing. So I know, for instance, in our curbside bags, not only would we have our calendar with our virtual programming schedule, but we also had in the town of Bennett, Adams County Human Services was doing virtual check-ins and ability by appointments. And so we were able to put that in the bag and speak to each other's programs and experiences that were happening.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that real quick is just we and I spoke a little bit to this, but we marketed ourselves not as individual branches, but as one big organization. So we even changed our website at one point. Our communications and innovations team, they changed our website to say Anythink Everywhere instead of, so that was one very formal thing that they changed on our website. So that was sending the message of Anythink is outside the walls of the library. And we're hoping to meet all of your needs in different ways. And so I think that was one little thing that actually did a lot. Yeah.
So first off, thank you very much for sharing a lot of innovative and inclusive ideas. And to piggyback off of what Ramiro said, kudos to you all for stepping up and serving the community to the extent you have. So, but for Ricardo and Whitney, what if or how has it maybe shifted or changed maybe your mission or philosophies going forward, and also or who you see as your customer base? Because I know that's something that has expanded for us, like who we've traditionally served, and maybe we're capturing a new universe.
I would say, and this is going to be the same answer, I'm sorry, but we're still learning that. So even though we've been open kind of on and off the last year now, we're still trying to get back to our normal hours. So we're still at limited hours at many of our locations, and the customers that are coming back are different. As you spoke to, we have a lot more homeschooling families or remote schooling families using our buildings to have the access to a study room or a quiet place to do school. That's new for us. Also, it didn't stop that Colorado was growing, and our county specifically is growing very quickly. And our demographics are changing, and we're servicing new populations. And so we're still trying to learn that and learn through that, how that's going to shift our services, whether it's what programming we offer, what hours we're open, because as we're looking at expanding hours back to our full scheduled hours, we're considering either earlier mornings or later evenings, because we are servicing populations that are working families and or both parents are working or both parents have multiple jobs. So how do we make sure our hours match what our community needs?
Mhm.
So we're taking a lot of stock of that right now and seeing who's using the library and how they're using the library. So that as we are moving and shifting back to either it's pre-pandemic hours or different hours, or pre-pandemic services or different services, that we make sure they align with what the community really needs. So we're really in that assessment piece of that. But I would agree with you. Things have changed and we want to make sure we're not just going back and throwing the same formula right back at it, but that we are willing to change and adapt as well and being proactive to that.
Yeah. Again, I'd say one of the blessings of COVID, in a sense, for a lot of people was it was pushing the reset button on a lot of stuff that we did, and it created an opportunity, not terrible circumstances, but it created the opportunity for us to again pause and say, why do we do things the way that we do them? Why do we open at this time and close at this time when our community actually needs us to be open at this time? Or we have kids who need to stay at the library until their parents get off of work. Why are we closing right when parents are getting off of work? Things like that. And so our hours are still limited in many of our, we're almost to 100%, but they are limited to an extent still compared to what they used to be before COVID. But we're, again, like Whitney said, we're kind of taking all of that into consideration as we come off of reset or pause and say, okay, if we're going to reopen or if we're going to go all the way, we're going to do it intentionally, and it may look completely different than what it used to look like.
First of all, thank you for sharing your time with us. I have two questions. One is your budget. Has your budget been impacted, especially when you talked about technology access and extending the Wi-Fi outside the library, and what kind of budget impacts have you had among all this change? And then the second question I have is, can you kind of give a brief summary of your value-based hiring and what that looks like?
Yes, I can take the budget one if you want.
Yeah, you take the budget. One, I'll
Okay.
take the values.
I can speak at a very high level when it comes to budget. We are very lucky to work in a county that is still very rapidly growing. And so our physical budget itself has not been too greatly impacted as far as people are still buying homes in Adams County and being able to retain those homes thus far, which is a really great thing, both for them and because we're funded through a mill levy on the property taxes. So that's our funding. So it hasn't been too greatly impacted. Now, how we spend that money and allocate that money is shifting a little bit. So for instance, we didn't do as many programs in 2020 or even in 2021 as we normally do. We were able to reallocate that into providing that technology, that Wi-Fi, and those a lot more digital books to folks who were at home during the pandemic. And so I think we're still figuring out how long-term we may continue to reallocate a few of our line items, but largely, I don't think most of the budget has changed. It would be small changes to reallocate to things that make more sense with where we're at right now. But overall, we haven't been too impacted, which has been good for us and good for our community, but I can't speak to that. That would be the same at every library district or the same at every kind of organization.
Yeah, as far as values based, so every organization has their own values, probably, that you would put up on a wall or advertise or whatever. We really try our best, and we're not perfect at it, but we really try our best to live out the values that we actually say. So some of our values are compassion for our customers and each other, as Whitney mentioned earlier, optimistic attitude. We're all learners.
Yeah, creativity.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can't think of all of them right
Yeah,
now,
I
but
think that's it.
if you think through those values and then we say, okay, if we're looking for this type of person, what type of questions, even when we're hiring or doing an interview, what type of questions kind of poke at some of those things a little bit? And so our interviews are not always just very like, give us your top 5 strengths and weaknesses or whatever. I'm sure there aren't very many people, maybe you ask that question, maybe you don't, but we ask questions that are going to get to the heart of some of those things. And then we ask questions of people sometimes that are kind of just fun a little bit. So one of our questions on a lot of our interviews is, what makes you happy? because in that opportunity, it gives somebody an opportunity to say, to talk about themselves. And if they're only talking about professional things, that's okay. But if it allows them to open up a little bit and share a little bit about who they are as a person, it just helps us to see just a little bit of a glimpse that might say, oh, okay, this is somebody who I think would fit really well. Or I don't know if this is a person who would fit super well with us for X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, our interviews are really fun. I think they're a
I
blast
think
because our questions are very non-traditional and it's really about getting to know that person. And to add to what Ricardo was saying is having your values there as you're looking at the applications and not being quite so hard on the applications, but more so, do they show any of those values in the application? So even if this might not be quite right, or we wish they would have done that a little bit differently, saying they really demonstrated though that they understand creativity and optimistic attitude, and I'm willing to interview them. And then getting to know them in the interview process, rather than maybe looking for a specific set of skills or a specific check mark on the application and being willing to take those chances. As long as they meet the basic HR requirements, to Ramiro's point.
Yes.
Hi, Marcus Steele from the city of Mesa, Arizona. And I have a question. I work in the arts and culture department. We have several different ways to engage several different generations. So when I think of a library, I really think of 4 different generations, and you can cut those up however you want to. But how do you, when you start developing programs, and as we have, everybody has that push online, how do you make sure that you don't leave the 2 top generations behind? Or how do you engage the multi-generational demographic that every municipality in this country has?
I feel like that was so important to us during this pandemic, which is one of the reasons that we did the senior check-in calls to make sure they had everything they needed to engage. We had a very long-standing established, I don't want to call them a sewing group because that sounds so quaint, but I mean, it was probably 20 ladies that would get together and use our sewing machines in our space to do some really amazing fiber art. And we were able to send them home with some stuff when we realized we were not gonna be able to host that for a long time. They're a vulnerable population. We sent them home with some stuff. We had the stuff, we would have used it in our program anyway. This way they can go home and continue that passion. We've been able to keep some of our older programming groups outdoors for now. So for instance, we're hosting our book clubs again, and groups that engage that demographic a little bit more outdoors in a safe way. And we've talked to them. I mean, we've really talked to them about, how do you feel the safest? How do you feel the most comfortable? How can we engage with you in the best way? Heard their feedback and tried to provide them with those opportunities. Because for a public library, yes, we service the littles that come to the story times, but that's one of the backbones of our community, is the older generations that see a value in a public library that need us, and we didn't want to leave them behind.
Yeah, I think the principle from that is just listening. Like, I think one thing that our organization does really well, and that doesn't even just come from us as managers, this comes from people even above us at times, who we do a lot of things well. And I think it could create a situation where you think, oh, I know exactly what this person needs, or what this community needs, or what this demographic needs. But I think the thing that I've learned a lot working with Anythink is that sometimes we don't know what everyone needs. And it's okay to ask questions and come from a posture of listening and saying, okay, what would be best for you? How can we best serve you? And some things you might not be able to say yes or no to, or say yes to, but you've at least heard and taken that input into consideration so that you can then take it and apply it to the services that you do offer. So I think listening is just really important for any organization.
Well, thank you. We've run out of time, and for our virtual participants, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get to your questions if you had any. If you submit them online, I'll make every effort to get you a response. To the panelists, Whitney and Ricardo, thank you so much for being part of this informative panel. I think the audience will agree. You were wonderful. I commend you for all the great things you're doing and for serving as a wonderful model for other libraries. Thank you all for being here, and thank you again.
Thank you.